available later on our website. Over to you, James.
Thanks, Liz. Okay, so hi everybody. I'm going to put a different hat on now. So as you probably know, most of you, my day job now is Director of Bradgate Park Trust in Leicestershire. So I agree with Alison and Liz, would do a quick overview today, mainly with myself and Ellie from the team at Bradgate, who is our volunteer administrator, to talk about volunteering at the trust and what we're doing, and hopefully it will spark some queries or questions or just inspire people, because I think the team are doing a great job actually. So I'm just going to do a few introductory slides to those of you who don't know the park, and then hand over to Ellie to talk about the real interesting bit, to be honest, and the detail of our volunteering. So where is Bradgate? So we're sort of sandwiched in between Loughborough and Leicester, just northwest of Leicester on the map there, just east of the M1, if you know the region. And this is the park and the woods to the north. So just in terms of people getting their bearings, I assume, can you see my pointer on your screens? I'll wave it around. Yeah, okay, great. So this is the main park here. The bits to the north of the river are the areas that are open to the public, or at least most of those. Some of these copses aren't. We've got several car parks. The one here at the southwest corner is the Newtown Linford, adjacent to the village. There's our main busiest car park. We have the Deer Barns and Cafe and Visitor Centre here in the middle of the park on the main carriageway that runs through. Hallgate car park is P3 here. Hunts Hill for Old John is here at P2, and then the two smaller car parks at Swidland Woods, which we also own to the north of this road. And this is an aerial view of the park taken from the sort of roughly the same from the south, basically looking. You've got the deer sanctuary area here to the south of the carriageway, which is out of bounds to the public. And you can just see the corner of Cropston Reservoir here on this aerial photo, and the lie of the land as it rises up to Old John here where my cursor is. So that's the kind of general overview of the park. So what does Bradgate have? What do our visitors love? Well, it's really well known across the region and beyond, really, for quite a few main key things. Hunts Hill and Old John Tower, particularly famous, particularly one of our key landmarks that people flock to. In fact, we've just opened this, I'm sure Ellie will mention later, for tours again for the first time in about 18 months this week, or last week rather. The deer herd. So varying between 300 and 500 head of deer, depending on what time of year. If you catch my drift, you come and see them. Mixture of fallow and red deer on site. Geology and fossils. Charnwood is really unique for its geology, and there are some incredible fossils. We've got some sort of internationally rare fossils on site as well, which we tend to not shout out their whereabouts too much for exactly that reason. Ruins, we've got 3 scheduled ancient monuments, no, 2 I think actually, so it's 2 scheduled ancient monuments and 5 listed buildings on site, this being the ruins of what was actually a follow-on building from Lady Jane Grey's house, for many years thought to be the ruins of her house, but actually this is slightly later, but on the same site, and the chapel with the roof on still there. And obviously the wider parkland, the river, Little Matlock as this part of the river is called, as you come on from Newtown Linford, really, really popular, especially the main carriageway with families and visitors. And an amazing history to the site, going right back to Paleolithic times and the Ice Age. And one particular area where we've got further digs happening this September, where there was clearly a lot of activity in Ice Age times, sort of hunter-gatherers hunting mammoths, apparently, as they came up the gorge through towards the park. Hence their further digs taking part in that. So really interesting history going back thousands of years on the site, not just hundreds. What else do we offer? Well, we've got, as I said, the Deer Barns is the sort of hub at the centre of the site, about a mile into the site from the Newtown Linford car park. That's where our main visitor centre, this photo here is, which again reopened back in May and is now open every day over the summer holidays. We sell quite a lot of products from the site, so venison, particularly obviously popular with local people, be it steaks, burgers, sausages, whatever takes your fancy. Wood from the estate, and charcoal, which we make. We've got down 2 charcoal kilns on site. We make our own charcoal, so great combo there if you fancy a barbecue this summer. This is the Deer Barns Cafe, this photo in the top right, which is our main cafe in the middle of the park. We're open for takeaway at the moment. We'll stay that way until the autumn. Real hub, busy hub part of the site. Like I said, amazing archaeology and history, a number of digs that have taken place over recent years, and opportunity for people to get involved with those. And the bottom right was really just to represent the great team on site. So we've got a team of 5 rangers, 2 assistant rangers, and 3 more senior rangers. A great team of wardens as well as the office team, and all of that supported, as Ellie will talk about, by an amazing volunteer team. So the park, as you may have gathered, is held in trust. We are a charity which was established in 1928, and the park was handed over to the charity formally in 1931. It was gifted by Charles Benyon. And it has these two main objects, providing it as a public park and recreation ground, and also to advance the education of the public in the care and appreciation of the environment. So hence the visitor centre, hence a lot of the events and activities we do. And we have in the past and will again in the future have a lifelong learning officer or a learning officer type post to do exactly that. We have a 10-year vision, which was set out in 2017. So we're just coming to about halfway through that, which sets out our 7 main objectives for how we want to manage the park and its visitors and improve both what we offer, but also, how the park is looked after. So we total just under 1,300 acres between the parkland, the woods to the north, and also a belt of farmland around the site, which provides a buffer for us. And the bulk of that is site of special scientific interest. And obviously combined with the other designations, the listed buildings and Scottish ancient monuments, we've got a lot of valuable assets to look after. We have a lot of partnership working with Natural England, Historic England and so on. So yeah, fascinating site, amazing place to work. But as I hinted at, a lot of that just wouldn't be possible without the sheer number of volunteers we have on site. And so I'll hand over to Ellie just to give you a bit of an overview of exactly what it is they get up to and how.
Hi guys, so as James said, I'm the volunteer administrator here at Bradgate Park Trust, and I've actually not been with the team for very long, only about 3 months. And obviously it's been quite an interesting time with COVID restrictions slowly lifting and a lot of changes here at the park. So it's been quite nice because we've been able to implement a lot of new things at the same time as kind of those restrictions lifting. So I'm going to give you a bit of a general overview of volunteering at the park and some of those considerations that we've put in place in the last few months. So these are the things that we're going to cover. So the types of volunteering we offer here, there's sort of 3 umbrella areas. So conservation, visitor experience and education. And then we've got a few weird and wonderful sort of volunteer opportunities that don't really fit into any of those umbrella kind of terms, so we'll cover those as well. We'll give you a sort of brief overview of the recruitment and induction processes. This is something that we've recently developed and we're quite proud of here, so that'll be good to discuss. We'll look at how we schedule our volunteer sessions and volunteer impact, which is the online system that we use. We'll look at how we cover kind of training development and how we support our volunteers in their roles in an ongoing kind of way. We'll also cover saying thank you to our volunteers, and then considerations around COVID, which I'm sure for a lot of you is a really hot topic at the moment. Can we have the next slide? Brilliant. So one of the sort of biggest areas of volunteering activity here at Bradgate Park is conservation activities. So we cover really a wide range of conservation tasks. Most of these are supported by our ranger team. So generally our volunteers work with the ranger team. We find that this works really well because they're almost guided sessions. There's a definite aim to the session, and it's quite rewarding for the volunteers to have a sort of start and end point to the session with an aim in mind. So here our volunteers get involved with things like dry stone walling, tree frame building, coppicing and planting of trees, and invasive species control. At the moment we've got a lot of Himalayan balsam cropping up at the park and also ragwort. So it's been a hot few days for our volunteers because a lot of them have been out sort of slashing and cutting down those sort of invasive species around the park. We also have what's called our Young Ranger scheme. So essentially this is a conservation activity scheme for 11 to 18-year-olds, and it covers very similar conservation tasks to those that our adults undertake, but obviously the sessions are for that age group and are sort of pitched with the abilities of those ages in mind. We also have a couple of gardens across the park. So we've got an allotment. We've also got an incredible walled garden that's part of our sort of ruins kind of complex that has just recently started to be open to the public. And we've got volunteers who work in those areas. we have what are called patrols, which are essentially litter picks. These were developed during lockdown, and actually for most of the last year have been the only activity that's been taking place. So our patrollers have been really useful, particularly during what's been a very, very busy period for the park, because not only are they litter picking and helping with the upkeep of the presentation of the park, but they're also kind of our eyes and ears around the park, and at times when it's been very busy, that's been really useful. Group patrolling's same kind of thing, but it's got more of a social element to it, and that's something that we've brought back as restrictions have lifted. And then wildlife surveys is pretty self-explanatory, but we have volunteers that are undertaking bird surveys, snake surveys, moth surveys, I believe, and beetle surveys currently, and we're looking at getting a butterfly survey in place. Next slide, please. So visitor experience activities range across the park from tour guiding. So as James mentioned, we've just recently opened up our Old John Tower for tours, and we've kind of been successfully running tours in our ruins for probably about 2 months now. Tour guiding is one of the roles that is that does require a bit more training than most of our roles. A lot of that's done quite informally on site. Although we have had some quite formalised training previously, but there's a lot around kind of shadowing and buddying with the volunteers. We have visitor centre assistants. So these are people who are really there to support the staff in the visitor centre, and are kind of there to be to sort of share information about the park and to discuss kind of the history, geology, ecology with our visitors. We also have stewards that work in different areas around the park, particularly on event days. So we've got a theatre event coming up that will have a number of stewards supporting us with. Next slide, please. And then, as James outlined, at the moment, our education activities are, have been a bit slower to get back up and running following lockdown, but we're kind of slowly building those up. We are actually we have award-winning range of sort of education activities that we deliver to groups of all ages. So we have everything from sort of primary school children right through to U3A groups attending the park. We also have public walks that are bookable and paid for in advance, and they range. Some rangers who lead those, and there's some volunteers as well. And then community champion talks is something that sometimes people are a bit unsure what it means, but essentially they are people that go out into the community and champion us. So they would go to different organisations. Perhaps a good example would be a WI meeting, and the talks range from kind of the history of the park to the geology and kind of ecology of the park, to talking about us as a sort of management team and how Bradgate Park Trust takes care of the park. And then some kind of weird and wonderful activities that don't really fall into any of these umbrella kind of terms, but we have photography volunteers who work right across the park, kind of taking photos of lots of different things that we then use those images to promote the park, either on our social media pages, on our website, or in other kind of hard materials that we have here at the park. And we also have some volunteers who work in kind of archives and collections care too. And then the dig would be another good example of a sort of ad hoc volunteer role. That role is, the dig's going to take place in September, and as part of that, those volunteers will be having some training in order to support the actual digging, and to help them sort of identify artefacts and kind of get them interested and invested in talking to our volunteers about what we might find, visitors about what we might find. So yeah, those are our sort of umbrella terms for our activities, and then some of the ones that don't quite fit into those. Next slide, please. So this is what we've done so far. So we've had 84 tasks completed. We've done 264 patrol or litter picking shifts. So I should say that tasks is things like a dry stone walling session would be considered a task, or the Old John Tower being open for tours would be considered a task. And the patrol and litter picking shifts are pretty self-explanatory, and you can see from 2 of our very cheerful volunteers there what that consists of. We've had 2,382 hours given, and the equivalent value of this is over £35,000. And we have got 108 active volunteers currently. That's kind of the figure as it stands sort of in June. Next slide, please. So this page looks a bit busy, but basically this is our recruitment and induction process. It looks like there are a lot of stages to this, but we kind of feel that if we get this right, then hopefully we have invested volunteers who are able, are prepared and confident in their volunteering role. So we feel that spending a bit more time on sort of recruitment and induction processes is really worth it for us. So our volunteer roles are generally advertised online and with partners such as VAL. VAL stands for Voluntary Action Leicestershire, and it's a really great local organisation that is very supportive in terms of volunteering in this area. We would have an expression of interest from a prospective volunteer, at which point, if they haven't seen a description of our volunteer roles, we'd then send them to them so that they could have a look at what is available. We also do, along with the volunteer roles, include a description of or information about what days that role takes place on generally, and if there is any sort of prior requirement in terms of training or experience or knowledge. For the vast majority of our roles, there isn't, which is quite nice for new volunteers. They would then complete a registration form, and as part of that registration form, we ask them to confirm whether they are happy for us to perform first aid on them if needed, or whether they consent to us using their imaging photography and filming. So there's a few kind of early boxes to be ticked at that point. We also have been holding volunteer meet and greets. So these probably started in, I'd guess, towards the end of May. We have had a lot of interest from prospective volunteers over lockdown. We think that's partly because we're an outdoor site and people have really started to realise how much the outdoors mean to them in this period. But also people have started to potentially become more community minded during this time as well. So there is that interest in volunteering, or increase in that interest. So we have been quite proactive about getting prospective new volunteers here to the park. And the way that we do that is through these volunteer meet and greets. So it's essentially a 2-part session. Firstly, a chat with me about general kind of volunteering here at the park. We introduce our online system to them and have a chat about the different roles, and then they also get to go out into the park for a tour with Di, who's our sort of lead in terms of volunteering in the ranger team. And we think that really sort of is a kind of a kickstart to them getting invested in the park, because they get to see behind the scenes of the park and things perhaps that they wouldn't normally get to be involved with. So it's nice for them to sort of already feel like they're part of the team. So at that point, we would contact them following the meet and greet and give them access to Volunteer Impact, which is our scheduling system. They would then book a shift, and at that point we would contact them. We'd arrange to meet them before that first shift, and we would go through what's called our induction checklist with them. Following that, when they're undertaking new roles at the park, we support them. A lot of the time volunteers will be undertaking activities with a member of staff, but we just like to make sure that that staff member is aware that they're new, that they can sort of assist them if there is anything that they're not clear about in terms of their role on the day. And then we have put in place an 8-week review. This is really informal. Essentially, it's just a way of us to check that the volunteer is happy, that we've did everything that we could do, and it's an opportunity to identify any areas of development or further support that are needed. Next slide, please. So this is, you can see here some examples of pages from Volunteer Impact, which is our scheduling, our online scheduling system. And so I'll just show you. Oh, I won't be able to see my mouse, but the picture on the left is the sort of front page. So you can see this is my version profile, my version of Volunteer Impact. But on this front page, it's great because you can put a news section, and there's also information about how to contact us as well. And then on the right, you can see our scheduling system. So this is a kind of calendar view. Each of those bars on a date is a volunteering activity, and they're colour coded. So the dark green's conservation, the sort of light greeny colour is patrolling, and then the purple is visitor centre. And there's different ones, blues tours, and so on and so forth. But what's really nice, I mean, we really encourage our volunteers to use this calendar view because we think it's very user friendly. But you can see all of and the calendar view will show you what shifts are available currently. You can see all of the shifts that have ever been available if you so wish. But this is really useful, and we think that actually it's a great way for our volunteers to be able to see and book onto shifts. What's really handy about this system for us is that it logs our volunteer hours, so it's providing an accurate record of all of the volunteering activity here at the park, and that's really great for us in terms of kind of quantifying what our volunteers are doing and being able to evidence that. It's really nice for our volunteers as well that they're able to see an accurate record of what they've contributed to the park. And there is a real level of autonomy for them with this system, so they can book onto the shifts as they like. They can cancel them up to 24 hours in advance. They don't have to have that awkward phone call with a volunteer lead. We do ask, obviously, that they get in touch with us if they want to cancel at short notice. But most of them seem to have really taken up the system and to be enjoying using it. We obviously appreciate that not everyone is tech savvy, and for those volunteers who are a bit unsure, we book their shifts for them. So we tend to sit down with them when they're here at the park, and we'll book shifts in advance for them. We aim to keep this up to date about 6 weeks, and we understand at the moment, particularly because everyone's kind of being let out. We're competing against, family, friends, lots of other activities. So we try to keep this as up to date as possible, so that it's useful for our volunteers to have to be able to book in activities quite far in advance, and it's useful for us to be able to get those sessions fully booked. Next slide, please. So this is kind of the process in terms of training, development and ongoing support. We have an induction checklist when our volunteers start. And we run through that with them. There's also options for adding sort of additional training that's more role specific. We provide PPE such as gloves and boots. For a lot of our conservation activities, it's not required, but for certain things like dry stone walling, we do ask that our volunteers wear steel toe cap boots. They have to complete a certain amount of hours to be bought them, but we have a stock supply as well here at the park. We have the 8-week review to identify those areas of development and support. A lot of our sessions are staff supported, so whether that's ranger-led conservation sessions or warden staff working in the visitor centre, we think it's important to have that support there for our volunteers, particularly in roles like the visitor centre where there's a sort of cash handling element to the role. So we have informal on the role training. We also have formal training sessions. This is particularly for things like equipment that you might use in conservation activities, but we have had some tour guiding and kind of formalised training previously before. We encourage peer support such as shadowing or buddying, particularly around roles such as tour guiding, and we have a yearly volunteer survey as well, essentially where we kind of catch up with volunteers about their experiences over the previous year and kind of areas for development in the coming year. Next slide, please. So how do we say thank you to our volunteers? We think it's really important to kind of celebrate our volunteers and all of the hard work that they contribute to the park. So we have put some volunteer benefits in place. Many of these are kind of in line with staff benefits, and we kind of feel that that's fair. So we offer a parking permit to our volunteers. When volunteers initially start, they will get a day permit for their sessions, but over time they're allocated a parking permit for longer periods, so a month or 3 months. They can use this as a volunteer, but also as a visitor. They get a free hot drink during their session. They also get 20% discount on their cafe and shop purchases. This is just on their purchases as opposed to sort of friends and family. And they also get a 10% discount on any venison products. We provide a uniform for certain roles after a specific amount of volunteering hours completed. There's not a uniform required for all of our roles, but for tour guiding and in the visitor centre there is. And we also organise a lot of volunteer social opportunities, or have previously. So at the moment, unfortunately, some of these we're not able to facilitate, but we do have a volunteer social team who have previously organised like local pub, bar, restaurant get-togethers and visits to other areas of interest. We have had yearly get-togethers at the park, and I think that's something that we're really keen to put into place as soon as we can. And something that is running at the moment is the information walks and talks. So a lot of the public walks here at the park cover areas sort of like the deer sanctuary that are off limits to visitors generally, and we've put in quite a lot of walks and talks in the last year that offer our volunteers that opportunity to go behind the scenes and also develop their knowledge of the park. I say in the last year, sorry, in the last 3 months, and they've actually been really well attended. So that's really positive. But yeah, the other elements of sort of celebrating our volunteering team, we hope to kind of get back into place as soon as we can. Next slide, please. So COVID considerations. So obviously this is a bit of a hot topic at the moment, and it was interesting hearing you guys talking about your kind of different areas of your parks that have recently opened and how you've managed this. So things that we have got in place are group numbers being restricted when it's held indoors, meetings being held outdoors where possible. We're regularly cleaning our indoor spaces such as the visitor centre, and the same with our equipment that's shared use. If volunteers particularly request personal equipment, we can also provide that as well. We would prefer volunteers to wear masks while indoors, and it's required for sharing vehicles.
Good idea. Good idea.
And you can see
Let's give that thing. That's a good idea. Thank you.
in the visitor centre, it's obviously quite a key topic because I managed to put it on this little page twice. It was obviously forefront of my mind when we were talking about this earlier in the week. But we have had mask wearing, hand sanitising and a one-way system in place in the visitor centre. We had track and trace as well. We now are not having track and trace. We're gently encouraging people to still follow these guidelines. It is not something that we can enforce, and we particularly don't feel that it's our volunteers' role to do that. But sort of signage is there trying to encourage that, and it would be our preference. And we've got temperature checks in place, and our volunteers are aware of procedures should they test positive or need to isolate as well. Okay, I think that's everything. Obviously, please do ask any questions, and hopefully that was useful to you, and yeah, might have provided a bit of insight into our kind of volunteering procedures.
Brilliant, thanks, Ellie. I just wanted to say as well that, as I said earlier, like there's so much on the park that we wouldn't get done or wouldn't get around to if we didn't have all that extra capacity added by volunteers, but also that I think it just goes to demonstrate all the work that Ellie's doing really that makes all that work. Like having a dedicated person to lead on that and be that friendly face of volunteers really is the key to it. I know, wearing my old hat, that at the City Council we just recruited to that post, and I have to say, I don't mind admitting previously I wasn't sure how that would work in my old role, whether it would be worthwhile and how it would be picked up, having a dedicated volunteer sort of administrator. But coming and obviously working on one single site is very different, and not being local authority perhaps is different as well now. But certainly, Ellie just proves that having a dedicated person to this can really, really pay dividends, I think, and that's the key thing I've seen already. And that we're really open with our volunteers about what other things they might want to do in the future, and if they come up with an idea, we'll listen to it and potentially adopt it. There's nothing that really they would want to do on the park that I doubt we'd say no thank you to. If they want to put their time in, we'll help facilitate it if we can. So yeah, any questions? Thank you.
Got one from Alison?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. It sounds so cohesive and well managed and well rounded and supportive of that role. It sounds brilliant. I just wanted to just because I'm interested about the young ranger team and how that works, and any sort of, you know, is that funded? Are the safeguarding? How is it managed? Just out of interest, really.
So it's currently not funded. It's been quite a long-term project, actually. So in terms of the kind of setup of the sessions, particularly it's held on weekdays. It's quite a small group number and not a huge, very long session. So normally about 3 to 4 hours on a Saturday. It's led by our ranger team. And essentially it's undertaking conservation activities, but with, you know, being mindful of the sort of abilities and abilities of the age range that we're working with. Throughout the summer, we're actually going to be having more young ranger activity at the park. And what's really nice about our young ranger team is actually that I think this is quite unusual, is there's quite a feed through. We tend to see people getting really invested and kind of coming into the park as staff members. So we've actually got 2 assistant rangers at the moment that are previous young ranger members, so they've actually come into kind of employment with the park through that route. In terms of funnily enough, in terms of funding, we are actually having some funded training in terms of safeguarding in the kind of near future. So there is the kind of funding elements, but it's something that we've talked about possibly looking at in the future, whether we could possibly identify some funding for young rangers who would like to attend but perhaps don't have the means to get to the park, or to sort of get their kits, you know, things like that. So we're looking at possibly like feeding into funding at some point.
And I think I'd just say as well, one of the things that works really well is we've got one of the ranger team now who is put on a slightly different kind of shift pattern and so on to be the lead with the young rangers, and that works really well. They've got a kind of dedicated person, and the rest of the team are very kind of pro working with the volunteers generally as a whole, which is always helps as well. You know, they realise the benefit that we're getting from volunteers.
Brilliant.
Yeah. We have as James said, we've got a young ranger lead, and we also have some volunteers that work alongside that as kind of assistant leads. Yeah, it works really well.
Great.
Lovely. Lisa, you've got a question?
Hi, yes, Ellie, it's really interesting to hear what you're doing with the volunteers. Obviously, your role sounds quite new. Has the park traditionally had all of that structure in place for volunteers, or is this something new you've introduced as part of your role? I'm just interested because I come from a volunteer support background, and obviously we always did all the inductions and checklists and everything like that. But I've found it very difficult with the volunteers to an established group in Stafford Park, because obviously they've been doing it for years, so now they don't really want to suddenly be controlled, as they see it, by all the paperwork.
Yeah, I can understand that. So the volunteering team here is fairly new. I think it's only been in place for about 6 years, which relative to how long the park has been managed in trust, it's not, you know, a huge amount of time. So I think in some ways our volunteers are possibly more receptive to that. Some of the things that I've discussed here are fairly new. I think the induction process is quite new and probably encompasses a bit more than it has done previously. However, generally that's been met with quite a positive response from our volunteers. What's been interesting this year, and something that we did have a bit of pushback on, because we had such a big gap in volunteering, we asked some of our conservation volunteers to undertake some refresher training, and some of our volunteers, I think, felt that you know, they had been undertaking some things such as, say, walling for quite a long period of time and were proficient in it. But for us, you know, for health and safety reasons, it had been a long time since they had undertaken that. We wanted to be sure that everyone was on the same page in terms of techniques and those sort of health and safety procedures. So we really kind of pushed for that this year. So yeah, sometimes there is a bit of pushback from the volunteers in terms of kind of ticking boxes and paperwork. But I think generally we kind of can understand that, you know, but we just sort of gently remind people that actually, you know, it's part of our role that we have to get them to undertake that, and so if they would sign the risk assessment or whatever, it'd be really helpful. But yeah, I think that possibly it does help that we've got a fairly new volunteer team, and those processes are kind of to be expected by them.
I think just as well, the other thing that's really new is the online system, isn't it? In terms of introduced that just before Ellie arrived and before my time, and the trust went through a process of working out which was the best online system to use. And obviously we have to be aware that there is a potential divide there for some people who don't want to use it, and try and accommodate them where we can still in paper forms of you know, copies and so on. The biggest issue obviously would be the calendar and then finding what roles are out there, but where we can facilitate people who don't want to use the system, we will. But for most people, even those who are perhaps initially resistant, it's really positive, just because it gives you that one-stop shop for right, what's on choice next month or whatever it might be. And occasionally we go through other methods. I mean, Ellie put an email out yesterday about the Ice Age digs we're doing in September, and was swamped with emails straight away, which is kind of exactly the reason we didn't put it on the online system, because actually this, you know, it would have been oversubscribed immediately. So we'll do it in a slightly different way when we need to. So
with the online system, we have actually implemented that in the last 3 months, and what we did is we offered, because of everything that was going on with sort of COVID and restrictions, we offered online training, but also one-on-one in-person training, where we basically distanced as much as possible and wore masks and things like that. I think that was really useful. For most of our volunteers, it's user friendly and they can pick it up straight away, but actually to have that option of additional support, I think was quite reassuring for some of our volunteers.
I must say I was very impressed with the IT system that you're using, and wondered whether it would be available for use in the public sector. I don't know whether our IT people would allow us to use it. Who do you buy it from?
It's an organisation. So the volunteer sort of interface is called Volunteer Impact, and the kind of behind the scenes version is called Better Impact. Right. Yeah, it's really, I mean, setting it up was quite daunting, but it's actually really user friendly for both volunteers and kind of that back office side. Yeah, I would really recommend it, and it's very similar. I've worked with the National Trust previously, and it's very similar to a system that they have called My Volunteering, in the way that it works in terms of the calendar view. So yeah, really effective.
I know there's a few different systems out there, Liz, and I know this one is one that, for example, this Nottingham City looked at just as I was leaving. They didn't actually go with, they went with something else, but I know that, you know, that it is one of the ones that certainly popped up in our awareness there. And as Ellie said, it seems in typical terms, it's one of those things you either use the bits you need, which is really the tip of the iceberg, but if you really want to get into it, then there's loads of data it can produce and so on, which is great if you want that level of detail. So
yeah, it's really good for reports, and for kind of pulling off almost like rotas that you can give, because obviously we're a very big part. At a weekend we might have volunteers working all over, and we need to provide that information so we can pull that report off the system, and we can also quantify sort of hours by activity and that kind of thing. So there's a lot that it can do behind the scenes.
Fantastic. Joe, you've got a question?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Really inspirational presentation, and your photos are fantastic, James. Bradgate Park's definitely now on my place to visit. I want to ask you the dirty question, and that is, what are your main streams of income? And with what you've got in place, is every year a struggle, or are you comfortable relatively?
Well, obviously, Joe, you've known me for a long time, so you know my background and perspective to this. So if I took all that into account, I'd say the trust is in a very positive place, basically overall financially, compared to obviously the years of local authority working I've been used to. Having said that, it can't rest on its laurels. So the single biggest chunk of our income comes from car parking. Now we're both sort of fortunate and unfortunate in the sense that we're very reliant on that, but we're in a situation where most people do come by car, be it you take your own view on that, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, and obviously charging for car parking is a lot better in PR terms than charging for actual entry, because you don't pay when you come in the gate, you pay to park your vehicle. If you turn up on another method, then please come in for free. So there was also a massive scheme last year. COVID really highlighted all of the other places. I mean, every single country lane for miles around was getting churned up. And so there was a massive double yellow lining scheme by the County Council last year, which is positive for the wider countryside, but also positive for us in terms of income, if I'm completely honest about it. We've just invested, for example, in an ANPR system at our main car park. We have this amazing visitor profile of people who are unable to put their ticket the right way up in their windscreen, which causes both them and us a massive amount of grief. I've never come across anywhere like it. The first thing I do when I shut my car door is check whether the ticket's the right way up. But it seems at Bradgate that's just not in the psyche. So that will hopefully get rid of that issue now, although ANPR isn't without its teething problems. So that's our biggest single source of income. And clearly it's something local authorities have been doing for years and are continuing to look at, as you know. The cafe then, our main Deer Barn Cafe, is the next single biggest income source. We did have a secondary cafe, but we've just taken the decision and are in the process of letting that out, rather than operating it ourselves, because we think someone else can give it a fresh look, shall we say, and a different angle to what we were doing previously. And then obviously all the usual things around grants and fundraising and donations. We have a small shop in the visitor centre, sales of produce from the estate, all those things which help top up the budget. And we do now have a dedicated grants and fundraising manager post who's both looking at revenue stuff like Ellie mentioned, as well as capital bits and pieces. So yeah, it feels very fortunate compared to, like I said, the background I've come from, but I'm also very aware that the trust can't take its eye off the ball and make big assumptions on that income every year. It's got to still come into the account.
That's great, James. No, really appreciate that information.
That's fine. But yeah, pop over, Joe. Come and have a look sometime.
I'll give you a call. I'll give you a call and ask for the tour.
Yeah, do.
Okay, any more questions for anyone else? One of the things I wanted to ask was, are you doing any work with the health service around sort of mental health or mindfulness programs or anything like that?
And well, if I just say initially, so we have been approached by Leicestershire County about their green social prescribing programme. So it's not one of the national pilots, I don't believe, but they are doing a pilot scheme in Leicestershire. So in fact, they've been in touch with us and with Ellie to talk about what volunteering opportunities we already offer that could tie into that, and whether that's a route to bringing what might be future volunteers to us. I don't know if we've heard any more lately, Ellie. Obviously, we've got quite a range of wide-ranging offer already. But we're certainly, again, like I said earlier, open to other ideas, or if there's a different type of volunteer, who might want a different type of volunteering experience with us, then we're certainly open to that. We've also had past and will have future contact with sort of employability type schemes around work experience, ex-offenders, that type of thing, but they're all fairly on hold at the moment, pending kind of A, post-COVID, and B, some capacity within the team. So, Ellie, have you heard? I don't know if you've heard any more about the green social prescribing, have you?
It's sitting with me at the moment because they've got a template for essentially they've got a template for the volunteer roles that we need to complete. But yeah, we will. It sounds like a really interesting scheme, and I think quite a lot of our roles could work really well with their requirements. So, yeah, I'm sure we will sort of progress that in the next few months, hopefully.
Yep.
Great. Okay.
Great.
Do you want to
Thank
move
you.
on to the next slide? Over to you then, Alison.
Sorry, just unmuting. Just a reminder of a few forthcoming events. I've just put that link there into the chat. If anyone wants to book on next month's visit, we'll be joining the landscape officers and parks team at the Solihull Wildways project. So the link is there to book via Eventbrite. So we welcome you on that. I think we've got about 14 or 15 booked on already, so plenty spaces. And in the newsletter, I've put some information following the government guidance on COVID, safer public places in outdoor settings. Obviously, you can still wear a mask and you can still socially distance, and we'll be very mindful of that. There's cafe refreshments at the end, but feel free to stay outside if that's something that you prefer to do. So try and accommodate that. Next slide, James. Thank you. So just to reiterate, we've mentioned in passing our next conference. So that will be our Green Heritage Conference at Snibston Country Park at Colville, Leicestershire on the 30th of September. So the following speakers listed there are all confirmed. There'll be a morning of speakers and an afternoon of workshops and breakouts. Just like to say thank you to the sponsors on the left who've committed to help us deliver this programme. So yes, again, COVID considerations. We put in lots of work in place, and this takes place in the Century Theatre, and again the whole site is managed by Leicestershire County. So I think their sort of COVID risk assessment is much, is very robust. So we hope, fingers crossed, that we'll be able to meet there and there's no further restrictions due. Thank you. And then we've got webinars set up for 21st of October. Speakers just to be confirmed. We'll put all that in the newsletter, and then we're hoping perhaps for a site visit in December, and we'll be making arrangements for that, so more information in due course. Next slide, please. We put this in the newsletter this week. So there is the new government guidance from MHCLG on these outdoor spaces. So that's all available on the newsletter if you have a look at that. And then the last piece of information that's not on the slide, I just wanted to add this. I've had an email today about lottery, community lottery. I'll just put this in the chat as well. Community lottery have got some, it looks like they've got some money left in the pot for their deadline of the 6th of August. So it does say that it's targeted to help address loneliness. So I'm presuming that could be, accessed by small groups for green spaces. So the link is in the chat for that, for their small grants programme. So just the last bit of information there from me. Thanks, Liz.
Okay, next slide, please, James. Yeah, thank you to everybody for contributing today. It's been another really great day, and yeah, don't forget to book your slot on the session in Solihull next month, which hopefully will be fantastic. I've been driving around Solihull recently, and the wildflowers on the verges look absolutely great. So yeah, well worth a trip out to see all those wonderful pictorial meadows. Solihull have spent an awful lot of money on them, so well worth a visit, I think, while they're still in bloom. Okay, that's the end of the session, and look forward to seeing you in August or September, hopefully.